After studying this module, you should be able to understand the main ideas of Carl Rogers' humanistic psychology, know about the biography of Carl Rogers, understand how Carl Rogers developed his theory and therapeutic technique, learn and analyze the basic assumptions underlying his theory. Introduction. From the phase when the people started comprehending about personality, theories related to it have presented a varied range of descriptions for behavior as well as anything which aids in understanding the individual. Carl Rogers is rightly the significant personality in the humanistic perspective. Rogers' approach of the development of personality is centered on several domains. The main focus is on the notion of self. In his view, the self is the main factor in the construction of personality as well as personal adjustment for an individual. The major doctrines of his approach would be dealt in coming up modules in detail. Rogers' approach of personality grew from his work as a clinical psychologist. The client-centered therapy or person-centered therapy was established by Carl R. Rogers from 1902 to 1987. During the course of his vocation, he devoted himself to humanistic psychology. Besides this, he is well recognized for his approach of personality development. Through his work with abused children, he began evolving his humanistic concepts. He asserted that psychoanalytic, experimental, and behavioral therapists were inhibiting their clients from attainment of growth as well as self-realization because of the way they undertook the analysis. According to him, the therapist ought to permit clients to come up with the answers on their own. Thus, the client should be able to guide the movement of the sessions. For him, the therapist should be supportive and not reconstructive. From the time when the theorists have started comprehending about personality, concepts have been proposed for the description of behavior as well as what comprises the individual. This module deals with his personal and professional life and how Rogers' theory came into being. In the subsequent modules, we will be emphasizing on his theory of personality, methodology used by him, and his client-centered approach. Carl Rogers stressed that subjective experience of reality serves as the basis for the individual's judgment and behavior. It is this, in reality, rather than external, objective reality that plays the key role in understanding the person's behavior. He felt that one should treat the person subjectively instead of treating them like items. Rogers' methodology to the understanding of an individual is phenomenological as well as idiographic. His opinion of the individual is that it is skillfully rational. Moreover, he believed that essentially all individuals are positive and are reliable individuals. These values are replicated in his theory of personality. Like Maslow, Rogers also prohibited the deterministic viewpoint of psychoanalysis as well as behaviorism and upheld that we act in the manner as we do for the reason in the way we see our circumstances. As nobody can understand what we are going through, it's only us who know the best about oneself. Carl Rogers accepted the core beliefs of Abraham Maslow. However, additionally, he said that on behalf of an individual to flourish, they require a setting that would offer them with authenticity, ingenuineness, and being open, being seen with unconditional positive regard and empathy, being listened to and understood. Devoid of these interactions, healthy personalities will not develop as they should. Much like a tree will not grow without sunlight and water. Individuals will grow to its fullest potential if the conditions are right and reach their potential if their environment is good enough. Nevertheless, the perspective of the individual human is unique, and we are meant to grow in different ways according to our personality. Rogers believed that people are inherently good and creative. They become destructive only when a poor self concept or external constraints override the valuing process. Now, let us summarize this module. The client centered therapy or person centered therapy was established by Carl R. Rogers, 1902 to 1987. Carl Rogers stressed that subjective experience of reality serves as the basis for the individual's judgment and behavior. It is this in reality rather than external objective reality that plays the key role in understanding the person's behavior. Rogers supposed that each individual can attain their objectives, aspirations, as well as requirements in life. Whenever it happens, it results in their attaining self actualization. His efforts had been recognized universally, and he has attained numerous honors and degrees conferred on him from various parts of the world. Rogers' notion of the self is well thought out to be humanistic and phenomenological. Carl Rogers wrote 16 books and many more journal articles describing it. Rogers' theory was based on 19 basic principles. Carl Rogers is best known for his non-directive approach to treatment known as client-centered therapy, concept of real and ideal self, and fully functioning individual. The main features of Carl Rogers' theory of personality, which would be discussed in the next module, are self, self-actualizing tendency, organismic valuing process, positive regard, positive self-regard, condition of regard, unconditional positive regard, incongruity, and fully functional individual.
Personal history of Carl Rogers. Early years. Carl Rogers was born to Walter A. Rogers, a civil engineer, and his mother, Julia M. Cushing, was a homemaker and pious Pentecostal Christian. Carl was the fourth of their six children. He was born in Oak Park, Illinois in 1902 on January 8. He had two older brothers and a sister and two younger brothers. Rogers was intelligent and could read well before kindergarten, because of which his education started in the second grade. He had a close relationship with his mother. She and the older children taught him to read at about age 4 and read many books very young, especially Bible stories. Carl had no close friends outside the family before college. Once Carl turned 12, his family relocated to a farm which was approximately 30 miles west of Chicago, and it was there he spent his adolescence. During this period, because of his observation of the natural surrounding around him and the cultivation of his family's farmland, he developed an inclination towards science. With a strict upbringing and many chores, Carl was to become rather isolated, independent, and self disciplined. Thus, his first career choice was agriculture initially. Education and career. These experiences directed him to the University of Wisconsin to study agriculture. Later, he switched to religion in order to study for the ministry. He received his B.A. from the University of Wisconsin in 1924. In the course of his junior year of college, Rogers journeyed to China as a part of a youth ministry conference. During this time, he was selected as one of 10 students to go to Beijing for the World Student Christian Federation Conference for 6 months. Once he had completed his graduation, he married Helen Elliott, moved to New York City, and began attending the Union Theological Seminary, a famous liberal religious institution. He recounts that his new experiences so broadened his thinking that he began to doubt some of his basic religious views. When he was abroad, a number of the rigid fundamentalism impressed upon him during his formative years diminished. Recollecting about what he learned on his journey, in retrospection, Rogers regarded this period as a time of personal growth. Eventually, Rogers decided against the life of a preacher. Religious loss was psychology's gain, as in 1931 he completed a degree in clinical psychology at Teachers College, Columbia University. In the course of this stage of his life that he came across the dynamic Freudian views of the clinicians directing his internship, which blatantly contrasted the rigorous, scientific, coldly objective, statistical point of view presented at the school. His theory developed as a result of Rogers' frustration with the authoritative analysis that therapists were imposing upon their clients. Rogers' evolution towards a humanistic approach to psychotherapy was noticeably inclined by this clinical training and inspired him to pursue an independent, unconventional professional career. Rogers' vision began to expand when he came across the Freudian psychoanalytic approach of the Institute for Child Guidance, where he diagnosed and treated children. However, he began to inquire the typical methodologies and procedures of psychology. He stressed the importance on personal awareness and felt that the therapist should know his clients to have increasing elasticity in shaping the treatment process. Rogers believed that it was vital for the individual to learn to cognize himself and make independent choices that are noteworthy in understanding the problem. During this phase of his life, he moved to Rochester, New York directly after graduation from Teachers College to work in a children's counseling center. He received his PhD in psychotherapy 1931. He had already begun his clinical work at the Rochester Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children. In the course of his practice in the clinic, he learned about Otto Ranks theory and therapy techniques, which motivated him in developing his own approach. He said that his work with the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children in Rochester had assisted him to know that it is the client who knows what hurts, what direction to go, what problems are vital, what experiences have been profoundly hidden. He said that it began to occur to me that unless I had a need to demonstrate my own cleverness and learning, I would do better to rely upon the client for the direction of movement in the process. This emphasis on listening to the client was the initial step on his own journey for development of his theory. At Ohio State University in 1940, Carl Roger was offered a full professorship where he stayed until 1945. During this period, while teaching over there, he wrote his first book on counseling and psychotherapy in the year 1942. Consequently, in the year 1945, he relocated to the University of Chicago and served as the professor of psychology and the executive secretary at the counseling center. He also opened up a clinic grounded upon his chief theoretical paradigms, which grew into a psychotherapeutic approach called client-centered therapy, and later it was renamed person-centered therapy. He published a book in 1951 wherein he outlines his basic theory on client-centered therapy, which highlighted the Rogers' unique therapeutic philosophy and style. The client should be free to determine her or his own therapeutic path rather than being led by a clinician towards self-awareness. This paradigm was extended further, based upon Rogers' many years of clinical experience. He used his technique with his clients and felt that it yielded better results when he relied on listening and allowing his patients to determine the rate of treatment. Carl Rogers felt that it was an asset that he never had one specific mentor, but was open to the influence of extensively differing viewpoints, as well as his own experience and that of his colleagues and clients. Nevertheless, if we go through his life and times, it seems evident that a number of significant people and circumstances influenced his thinking. The experience of living on a farm as a child taught Rogers about nature's inexorableness and its strength and growth. Academically, he was immersed in liberal Protestant beliefs of Paul Tillich. He was also intensely influenced by John Dewey's emphasis on experience as a basis for learning. He was directly exposed to Dewey's philosophy of no-nonsense, vigorous self-reliance, thoughtful exposure to experience and concern for others. When he attended a course given by William H., student of Dewey, while at Teachers College in Columbia, he came under the influence of the Americanization of ranks theory as advocated by Jesse Taft, a student of ranks. Another major influence on Rogers during the Chicago years was existentialism, particularly the writings of Zorin and Martin. Rogers wrote that reading Zorin had a loosening up effect, reassuring him to express in philosophical terms experiences he had as a psychotherapist but was unable to formulate. Thus, we can say that his training was an eclectic mix of psychoanalysis, testing and measurement, and techniques of child guidance. He was also influenced by the progressive education movement with its emphasis on helping students to be self-directed learners and work cooperatively. In 1957, he took a joint position in the departments of psychology and psychiatry at the University of Wisconsin. After this, Rogers traveled to a variety of colleges. His work was acknowledged, and in the year 1955 he received the Nicholas Murray Butler Silver Medal from Columbia University. Carl Rogers was also given an award from the American Psychological Association in 1956 for his special influence to research in psychotherapy. In his tenure, he received numerous awards and appreciations for his contributions to the realm of psychology. Based on his work, he wrote a book in 1961 titled On Becoming a Person. In that book, he specified that unless I had a need to demonstrate my own cleverness and learning, I would do better to rely upon the client for the direction of movement. Regrettably, it was a time of conflict within the psychology department, and Rogers became very disenchanted with higher education. Carl Rogers, in 1964, took up a research position in La Jolla, California. In 1968, he facilitated in establishing the Center for Studies of the Person, an organization of person centered professionals piloting their workshops, research, and activist initiatives. Rogers remained active with the center for the rest of his life, traveling internationally and facilitating groups on person centered approaches. Through the center, Rogers was influential in the expansion of the use of encounter groups and applied his person centered approach to improving group dynamics in corporate, government, and international diplomatic arenas. In the year 1972, he received a Distinguished Professional Contribution Award from the American Psychological Association and a Distinguished Professional Psychologist Award from the Division of Psychotherapy. He provided therapy, gave speeches, and wrote until his death in 1987. Till his last, Carl Rogers was dedicated to applying his theories in areas of national social conflict, and he traveled worldwide to accomplish this. In Belfast, Ireland, he brought together influential Protestants and Catholics. In South Africa, blacks and whites. In United States, consumers and providers in the health field. His last trip at the age of 85 was to the Soviet Union, where he lectured and facilitated intensive experiential workshops fostering communication and creativity. He was astonished at the numbers of Russians who knew of his work. Along with his daughter, Natalie Rogers, and psychologist Maria Bowen, Maureen O'Hara, and John K. Wood, in the middle of 1974 and 1984, Rogers set up a series of residential programs in the US, Europe, Brazil, and Japan, the person-centered approach workshops, which emphasized on cross-cultural communications, personal growth, self-empowerment, and learning for social change. He committed himself to applying his work in various spheres. His research and experiential work concentrated on demonstrating the psychological situations for permitting open communication and enabling individuals to achieve their full potential. He led the movement away from traditional psychoanalysis and developed client centered psychotherapy, which emphasizes that each client has within him or herself the vast resources for self understanding, for modifying his or her self concept, attitudes, and self directed behavior, and that these resources can be selected by providing a definable climate for facilitative attitudes. Carl Rogers was a perfect example for compassion and democratic ideals in his own life and in his work as an educator, writer, and a therapist. All through his career, he has received abundant amount of awards in recognition of his contribution to the field of psychology. Sadly, in 1987, Carl Rogers died of a heart attack in San Diego, California. General outline of Carl Rogers' approach. Carl Rogers is the pioneer of client centered approach, used in psychotherapy. According to him, an individual is responsible for his own growth and well being. The therapist should facilitate the therapeutic session in the right direction. He alleged that in order for a client and therapist relationship to grow, the therapist must exemplify such traits as unconditional positive regard, empathy, trust, and congruence. He also developed a self theory in which he defined how the client views himself or herself and how by undergoing therapy one can help change their view and future. Rogers' concepts and doctrines organized together and now are recognized as humanistic psychology. Basic outlook. Immersed in counseling and psychotherapy, with all his incongruities, the client wants to grow, wants to mature, wants to face his problems and work them through, accept and clarify his initial expressions of feeling, and a fuller, deeper expression of feelings will follow. Accept and clarify these, and insight will follow. Accept and clarify these insights, and the client will begin to take positive actions in his life and develop self acceptance, self understanding, and the ability to deal with his own problems. Rogers himself wrote, "The aim of this newer therapy is not to solve one particular problem, but to assist the individual to grow, so that he can cope with the present problem and with later problems in a better integrated fashion." Basic assumption of Carl Rogers' theory. Rogers assumed that every person can attain their goals, wishes, and desires in life. When they did so, self actualization took place. This was one of the Carl Rogers' vital contributions to psychology, and for a person to reach their potential, a number of factors must be satisfied. The core concept of Rogerian theory is that the human experience is unique to each individual, and if given appropriate conditions for self exploration and inquiry, people will move towards psychological health. This fundamental conviction established into a theory coined becoming a person, which grew out of understanding obtained through thousands of hours in clinical practice. Rogers believed that people are basically trustworthy, that they have immense potential for understanding themselves and determining their own problems, and are capable of self direction if they are in a relationship that is empathetic, supportive, caring, and without judgment. His belief in the client's capacity for self healing is in contrast with many theories that view the therapist techniques as the most powerful agents that lead to change. Rogers' notion of the self is well thought out to be humanistic and phenomenological. His theory is grounded directly on the phenomenal field personality theory of Combs and Snigg. Rogers' explanation of his theory is extensive. He wrote 16 books and many more journal articles for describing it. Rogers' theory was based on 19 basic principles, and these are: first, Every organism lives in a constantly varying world of experience, of which they are the center. Second, the organism responds to the field as it is experienced and perceived. This perceptual field is reality for the individual. Third, the organism acts as an organized whole to this phenomenal field. Fourth, as a consequence of interaction of individual with the surroundings and principally as a result of evaluational interaction with others, the structure of the self is formed, an organized, fluid but consistent conceptual configuration of perceptions, of features and relationships of the I or the me, composed with values committed to these notions. According to him, gradually a part of the complete perceptual field slowly becomes differentiated as the self. Sixth, usually behavior that are embraced by the organism are those that are consistent with the concept of self. Seventh, one can comprehend behavior in a better manner through the internal frame of reference of the individual. Eighth, the organism has one elementary tendency, and that is of striving to actualize, sustain, and enrich the experiencing organism. Ninth, behavior is mainly the goal directed effort of the organism to fulfill its needs as experienced in the field as perceived. 10th, emotion complements and, in general, enables such goal directed behaviors, the kind of emotion being related to the perceived significance of the behavior for the maintenance and enhancement of the organism. 11th, the values attached to experiences and the values that are part of the self structure. In some cases, are values experienced directly by the organism, and in some cases, are values interjected or taken over from others, but perceived in misleading way, as if they had been experienced directly. 12th, as experiences happen in the life of the individual, they are either symbolized, perceived, and organized into some relation to the self, ignored because there is no perceived relationship to the self structure, denied symbolization or given distorted symbolization because the experience is inconsistent with the structure of the self. 13. Sometimes it happens that behavior may be carried about by organic experiences and needs which have not been symbolized. Such behavior may be erratic with the structure of the self, but in such cases the behavior is not owned by the individual. Fourteenth, psychological adjustment occurs when the concept of the self is such that all the sensory and visceral experiences of the organism are or may be assimilated on a symbolic level into a consistent relationship with the concept of self. 15th, psychological maladjustment occurs when the organism refutes awareness of substantial sensory and visceral experiences, which subsequently are not symbolized and organized into the gestalt of the self structure. When this condition occurs, there is a likelihood of psychological tension. 16th. In some situations concerning predominantly comprehensive lack of threat to the self structure, experiences which are changeable may be perceived and examined, and the structure of self revised to integrate and include such experiences. 17th. Those experiences which are not consistent with the organization of the structure of the self may be perceived as a threat, and the more of these perceptions there are, the more severely the self structure is organized to maintain itself. 18th. When the individual perceives and agrees to take into account consistent and integrated system all his sensory and visceral experiences, then he is inevitably more understanding of others and is more accepting of others as distinct individuals. 19th. When an individual perceives and accepts into his self structure more of his organic experiences, he finds that he is interchanging his present value system, based comprehensively on introjections, which have been distortedly symbolized, with a continuing organismic valuing process. Hence, Rogers was an applied psychologist, following in the footsteps of Freud and Jung in his own work, using what he learned while practicing psychotherapy to develop theories about the human condition and human relationships, including the relationship of client and a therapist. Roger also believed in an innate human drive towards self actualization. If people use this actualizing tendency as frame of reference in living their lives and ultimately reach their full potential. The main features of Carl Rogers' theory of personality, which would be discussed in the next module, are self, self actualizing tendency, organismic valuing process, positive regard, positive self regard, condition of regard, unconditional positive regard, incongruity, and fully functional individual. Let us summarize what we have learned. The client centered therapy or person centered therapy was established by Carl Rogers. Carl Rogers stressed that subjective experience of reality serves as the base for the individual's judgment and behavior. It is this inner reality rather than external, objective reality that plays the key role in understanding the person's behavior. Rogers believed that every person can achieve their goals, wishes, and desires in life when, or rather if they did so, self actualization took place. Recognition of his work has come through dozens of honorary awards and degrees bestowed on him from around the world. Rogers' notion of the self is well thought out to be humanistic and phenomenological. Carl Rogers wrote 18 books and many more journal articles describing it. Rogers' theory was based on 19 Basic Principles. Carl Rogers is best known for his non-directive approach to treatment known as client-centered approach or therapy, concept of real and ideal self and fully functioning individual. The main features of Carl Rogers' theory of personality, which would be discussed in next module, are self, self-actualizing tendency, organismic valuing process, positive regard, positive self-regard, condition of regard, unconditional positive regard, incongruity, and fully functional individual.